In disc golf, most players shop for their discs based on flight numbers. After all, most of the time, that's the only way to get some idea of how it should fly. So why then is the MVP Trail selling out at store after store, including our own, when the only disc that shares the exact same flight numbers, the Prodigy H3, is discontinued? Let's find out, because the disc is in the details. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and this is the MVP Neutron Trail. To help us learn about the trail, we're going to throw it and compare it to a few other drivers that are trying to occupy this straight distance driver market. But before we do, we should consider why this particular slot hasn't really existed before. And that's because making a disc go straight is really hard. As we found out in our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series, while searching for the straightest putter, mid-range, twice, and fairway driver, finding actual straight discs is really difficult. Many companies will put flight numbers on discs like 0 turn and 0 fade, or -1-1, or -2-2. And many players read those and believe that means straight. But some of these discs are much more overstable or understable than the straight flight that they are claiming to have. And here's the other thing. What does straight really mean? For example, is this straight? Is this straight? And the only reason that we care about the difference between those two is that we're not always going to be throwing on a wide open fairway like where we do our testing. Sometimes you're throwing on tight wooded fairways and you need a straight disc to actually hold a specific line. Let's take the discontinued Prodigy H3 as an example. It had flight numbers of 10-5, -1-1, and it was approved by the PDGA back in 2015. It was later retooled and reapproved in 2018 as the H3 V2, or version 2. However, the H3 and the H3 V2 are kind of confusing. Prodigy's website says that the H3 V2 is 10-5, -1-1, which is the flight numbers of the H3, but the stamp on the disc has been updated to say 11-5, -1-2. So I'm not entirely sure which of these is correct. And when we threw the H3 V2 a few weeks ago in our Flight Numbers Don't Matter Wraith comparison, let's just say it wasn't straight. Well, not exactly. For the most part, it was pretty understable. And with the tailwind that day, it did find some low speed fade, but in a headwind, this would have had way more turn. Now, flight numbers are not just an indicator of how a disc should fly. We should also think of flight numbers as a key way that manufacturers market their discs to players. At that point, we can understand why this next disc ended up with the flight numbers that it has and the actual flight that it has. This is the Finish Line Era. Rated at 10-5, -1, 1.5, the Era is a hybrid fairway distance driver from Drew Gibson's Finish Line discs. Designed and manufactured in the United States, Finish Line now has 7 different approved molds, nearly all of which are fairly overstable. And that overstability makes sense, at least to me. After all, Drew Gibson is the one in charge, and he's known to throw with quite a bit of power. But how does the Era fly for an average Joe like me? Well, not straight, I can tell you that much. Every time I've ever thrown an Era, it's been surprisingly overstable. So the H3 was marketed as straight, but it was pretty understable. The Era was marketed as fairly straight, and it was very overstable. And you're probably wondering why I'm spending all this time talking about other discs instead of the subject of today's video, the MVP Trail. But to understand why the Trail is flying off the shelf, we need to understand why these other discs aren't. Because as a disc golf shop owner myself, it's my job to order every single disc that we stock and pack and ship every order we receive, which is how I know that these H3 and Era aren't selling super well, at least not around here. But what about 2 other allegedly straight drivers? Perhaps they'll perform better. Let's take a look at the DGA Undertow and Rogue. The Undertow is rated at 10-4, -1-1, and the Rogue is rated at 11-4, -1-1. and both are described by DGA as straight stable discs. In fact, the description of the Undertow goes so far as to say it's great for tunnel shots and wooded fairways. And I want to believe that, I really do. But when I threw it, it did this. The Undertow was so overstable, like 3 fade overstable. And I tested an Undertow a few months ago when I was considering what discs I wanted to do videos on. And it was really, really overstable then as well. So maybe the Rogue flies closer to its flight numbers. On backhand with a slide hyzer, the Rogue doesn't quite flip to flat, doesn't really go straight, and just fades. And just to be sure, I threw it again, and same result. Now maybe the Undertow and Rogue are designed for players with a lot more power and torque than I have. I'm not sure, but they were just unbelievably overstable for me. So that takes us back to the Trail. Rated at 10.5, -1.1, the Trail is the latest disc in James Conrad's line, and was released in July earlier this year. Now the Trail does have something unique and different compared to most of the discs that we just saw, and most of MVP's lineup: dome. But like I mentioned earlier, the Trail is selling like crazy. We've sold out both orders we've got, and I've had people asking if we have more, requesting videos on the Trail multiple times just in the past few weeks. And so far, the 4 discs we've seen didn't meet expectations and weren't very straight. So what is it that's making the Trail fly off the shelf? Of course, James Conrad's popular. He only threw the most famous shot ever. And while the Trail is from his line of discs, there are other Conrad discs that have not been anywhere near as popular. And yes, it's made by MVP, but there's plenty of MVP discs that I have no problem keeping in stock. So what is it that's driving these sales? Well, it must be flights like this. With about as much power as my poor elbow could muster after throwing for 3 days straight, I still managed to get a fairly straight flight from the Trail. Starting out flat, it gets the faintest of turns, this kind of slow drift, and then a fairly gentle and minimal fade. So yes, there is some movement left to right here, but I've definitely seen the Trail fly straighter. And I'll be honest, this was the best that my arm could manage. If you've followed our channel for any length of time, you'll know that I've struggled with some elbow issues for the last 2 years. And it's one of the many reasons that I'm extremely grateful to Caleb for all the effort he puts in for our channel. Thankfully for me, you, and anyone watching, Caleb was available just long enough to give the Trail a few throws. Now, I limited our comparison today to 10 to 11 speed discs close to the Trail in flight numbers, hoping that we would find something that flew about the same. But I'm also sure that there's some 12 to 13 speed drivers that fly straight for some of you. So if they do, please let us know in the comments below. And also comment below what disc we should explore next. Remember, the disc is in the details. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Because, as a disc golf owner, both are described by DGA as straight distance. Nope. I'm not sure, but they were just unbelievably overstable and if you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.